Okay, so we're now recording. So welcome everyone. I'm here. I'm really happy to bring you this webinar today. I think it's going to be very, very exciting. My name is Jennifer Temmer, and I'm a project officer at the International Institute for Sustainable Development in the Sustainable Development Goal Knowledge Program, or the SDG Knowledge Program, and I will be your moderator for today. So we have a very diverse group of organizations and people from across the country, I guess across the continent, to speak with us today. And they all have a similar goal, and that goal is to bring the Sustainable Development Goals closer to home in order to stimulate and inspire progress at a local level within their own communities. So these organizations, they include Community Foundations of Canada, the British Columbia Council for International Cooperation, the Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance, Hawaii Green Growth, the United Way of Winnipeg, and the International Institute of Sustainable Development. We're taking a panel approach to this discussion today in order to best learn from our participants. So to begin, each presenter will briefly give us a little run through of their initiative, and then we'll take about 40 minutes and to have a moderated panel discussion. So then after that, we'll open up, I'll open it up to anyone who has, if anyone has questions. And if you have questions, you can write them in the chat box. So before we begin, just a few little housekeeping rules. When you logged on, you may have noticed that you are muted, but maybe just in case, if you could maybe mute your devices to make sure that we don't have any background noise for feedback and that sort of thing, that would be fantastic, because as I said, we are recording this. If you have any technical issues, you're more than welcome to contact myself in the chat if you can, and if you can't, then you can contact my colleague Kyle Wiebe here in Winnipeg, and his email address is shown on the screen. So I'll just give you a second to maybe write that email address down in the event that you have any sort of technical issues, and he will try and to assist you. So after the webinar is finished, once I have the recording ready, I will be posting it on the IISD website. But if you do want a copy or can't get it from there, you're also more than welcome to contact myself after the event. And my email address and information will be at the very end of the presentation. So so that you can get it there, and I'll remind you at the end as well. So to begin, I just wanted to introduce our 4 panelists today. We have Kusum Wijesekera from BCCIC, Celeste Connors from Hawaii Green Growth, Stefan Junkert from the IISD, and Seema Ayers from the Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance. Kusum, she actually started her career as an aerospace engineer, and she really liked encouraging females and other women to enter the field, a field that's really been historically dominated by males. She took time from her engineering career to travel and volunteer in other countries, such as Sri Lanka and South Korea and Nepal, working with the homeless and disadvantaged women and children there. She served on the board of directors for her international as director of programs and also as vice president. Her international's programs in Nepal and Canada help facilitate community development by empowering women and children through education. In 2016, she traveled to Nepal to oversee international programs and to work with the field staff to improve programs and reporting and communication. So she's currently involved with GECO, the Central Okanagan's chapter of BCCIC's international, or BCCIC, working to support sustainable and local and global change using the United Nations SDGs as their framework. Celeste Connors. Celeste, She has over 20 years of experience working at the intersection of economic, environment, and energy, and international development policy. So before joining Hawaii Green Growth, she was the CEO and co-founder of CDOT's Development, which works to build resilient infrastructure and services in vulnerable communities. Celeste previously served as a Director for Environment and Climate Change at the National Security Council and National Economic Council in the White House, where she helped to shape the administration's climate and energy policies. Prior to joining the White House, Celeste served as a diplomat in Saudi Arabia, Greece, and Germany. She also held positions at the U.S. mission to the UN, served as the climate and energy advisor to the Undersecretary for Democracy and Global Affairs at the U.S. Department of State, and worked for the city of New York. Celeste is a faculty member at Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies in the Energy, Resources, and Environment program. She holds an MSc in Development Studies from the University of London's School of Oriental and African Studies, and a BA in International Relations from Tufts University. Celeste is a term member on the Council on Foreign Relations, a member of the Global Island Partnership Steering Committee, and serves on the board of America's Service Commissions. Stefan Junkert from the IASD. Stefan he's been working with the IASD as a project officer on the negotiations on reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation in developing countries. And as an associate working in the areas of sustainable agriculture, genetic resources for food and agriculture, and linkages between international regulation on biodiversity conservation and other issue areas, such as trade and climate change. He completed his PhD on institutional interplay in global environmental governance at Humboldt University in Berlin in 2007. He's originally from Germany and is currently based out of Gatineau, Quebec. And Seema Ayers, she is an associate director and research assistant professor from Jacob France Institute at the University of Baltimore's Merrick School of Business. Dr. Ayers oversees the Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance, which is also part of the Urban Institute's National Neighborhood Indicators Partnership, of sites that provide longitudinal and community-based data on demographics, housing, crime, education, and sustainability. Dr. Ayers is recognized as an expert on strategic planning and community development. Recent projects include the Elderly Park Bryan Criminal Justice Innovation Plan, Regional Housing Plan for the Opportunity Collaborative, and an evaluation of Baltimore City's Vacant to Value program, and verification of work for the Baltimore Energy Initiative. Her research focuses on the role of data sharing in collaborative and public innovation processes. So to begin, each of our panelists is going to give us a quick presentation, just to give us a little bit of an overview about each of their initiatives. So we're going to start with Kusum. And Kusum, if you can unmute yourself, that would be fantastic. And maybe just say hello.
Hello.
Hi, perfect, wonderful. And I have control over the PowerPoint presentation, so just let me know when you'd like to move to your next slide.
Sure, sounds good.
Oh, guess we're gonna. There we go.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Jennifer. I'm excited to hear about all the initiatives from our group of panelists, and I'm also excited to see the number of people that are showing interest in this type of work. So I'll be talking about the SDG Scorecard Project, which is an initiative led by both BC, CIC, and GECO. This project basically localizes the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and provides a snapshot of progress made at a community level. It's more or less a report card for a particular community on how well they're progressing with respect to the 17 goals. It'll highlight the areas in which they excel, but also on areas that require more consideration. And just like a school report card, if you want your overall GPA to go up, you have to look at all the subjects and not just focus on the ones that you like or the ones that you excel in. And also sometimes you don't know where you need to improve on. and where to put your focus until you get that report card. So if we can flip to the next slide, you can see this is the report card that we developed. You can see it's a dashboard that has numerous colors. So for example, red means poor progress and improvement is needed, and you can quickly see those ones right there. Green means it's good progress, yellow means it's average, and you'll notice that there is one that's gray. Gray just means that there isn't enough data for us to measure the progress. And the dashboard that we present on our website is actually interactive. So if you want to get more information about a specific SDG and where we got the rating for it, you can click on it, and then it'll provide you a list of the indicators that we use for that goal, as well as the rating associated with them. And you can also download a full report for that particular city, and you can see a list of the sources that we use to gather the data. And when we develop the scorecards for multiple cities, it provides an opportunity for knowledge sharing. So if one community excels in a particular area, whereas another one may be struggling with it, instead of having to go over the same hurdles, communities, so we're talking about municipal government, organizations, so NGOs and individuals, they can share their knowledge and their approaches. And right now, what I'm working on is a scorecard for the city of Kelowna. And the methodology we'll be using for this is to start at the community level. So basically what we're going to do is gain access to the official community plan for Kelowna, as well as other city planning documents, such as the climate action plan, or documents that seek to tackle things such as affordable housing and transportation. And as we go through these documents, we'll determine which indicators the city has already identified and see how they line up with the UN's SDG and sub-targets. There'll be some sub-targets that are not addressed, or they don't have, or the planning documents don't have indicators identified. So in order to fill in these gaps, we will use provincial and national standards and targets. So basically we'll be starting off at the municipal level, and then we'll go up to the provincial level and national level to fill in our data. And then once we get a complete set of indicators, what we're going to do is meet with city planners and have a discussion with them about what they think about the indicators that we've selected and whether they're practical and appropriate for measuring progress towards SDGs in a city. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Kasum. The next presenter will be Celeste.
Hi, good morning, and aloha, everybody from Hawaii. And I'm just confirming that you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. It's interesting. I think the Aloha Plus Challenge, just to explain that this is one of the key initiatives that we in Hawaii Green Growth work on. Maybe just to first explain our organization, that Hawaii Green Growth is a public-private partnership that includes over 100 members from across civil society, private sector, county, and state level partners that came together in about 8 years ago to really figure out how Hawaii statewide could get on a green growth pathway, actually inspired by the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation meeting that was hosted here in Hawaii in 2010. And then when this group came together, they thought, what could we actually do together considering that we represent various sectors across the economy? There was a desire not just to focus on energy or waste or water, but this group saw that they were uniquely positioned to actually look at cross-sectoral challenges, which actually is very related to the host culture here in Hawaii, building on thousands of years of Hawaiian culture practices of taking a sustainability approach to development and resource management. And so our relationship with SDGs actually very much evolved from a bottom-up approach. In other words, the Aloha Plus Challenge, which was launched in 2014 officially at the UN Small Island Developing States meeting in Apia, Samoa, actually predates the formal launch of the SDGs. The coloring is remarkably similar. However, I think that's an important point because we very much see the success of these localized frameworks for action that can help support SDG implementation globally. As my colleague just mentioned, having that very community-based involvement and level, and that's where we really have to start, because we everyone on this call, I think, recognizes we measure what matters. We have to figure out what matters to the communities. And so the process that we have been convening over the last 3 years to really identify our locally and culturally appropriate metrics and indicators through the Aloha Plus Challenge that are reflected on the dashboard. So really what we do is look to identify the relevant indicators and metrics. We track that on an online dashboard hosted by on the state.gov website. It involves, as I said, our 4 county mayors, the governor's office, the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. If you just go to the next slide, this will give you a snapshot of the dashboard where we are tracking progress on all 6 2030 goals. And I should mention actually that Hawaii was really the first state in the US to sign on by statute to the Paris Agreement. Hawaii has a long history and recent history, a long history of systems thinking, but recent history of having ambitious goals. So in the energy sector, we have a 100% clean energy goal by 2045, and this builds on our 2030 goal to have 70% clean energy. We also have a very ambitious local food goal to have food self-sufficiency by 2020, but we have a 2030 goal that we're tracking on the Aloha Plus Challenge dashboard. And so we also just recently launched a goal to achieve 100% clean transportation by 2045 as well. So needless to say, this dashboard that we're working with our partners on tracks a 2030 goal, but with a view to achieving our 2020 goals and our 2045 goals. I'm not sure if, I don't have control of this slide, but maybe we could flip to the next slide. This is a snapshot of the dashboard that I just described. So essentially what it does is we pull data from various sources, from our county partners, our state partners, various private sector partners, civil society, where information is being tracked. It was actually, I think, a 2-year process to really convene groups statewide, explicitly connecting with our grassroots partners as well as our policy partners to identify these metrics and indicators. I mentioned earlier that Hawaii is the first state to sign on to the Paris Agreement by statute. There's an ongoing commission that's meeting to determine exactly what that GHG mitigation goal should be, but we have a placeholder there. So in a sense, what I'm saying is that the dashboard is an evolving platform really designed to both provide transparency in the process, so everybody can actually showcase and see what we've all collectively committed to get on a more sustainable pathway. It's also a way of educating individuals, and we've been engaging a lot of the students and next generation leaders in the state on actually how we can innovate around this data. As a next step, we're really looking toward what we call Dashboard 2.0. Now that we've identified the metrics and indicators that we're tracking, what are some innovative technologies and just general apps that we can use to get more community-driven data, where people could be encouraged and can see how they can move the dial on achieving some of these goals through their local efforts, community gardens, school gardens, various waste programs locally. So I'll just stop there and look forward to answering any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Celeste. Our next presenter will be Stefan.
Thank you, Jen, and good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, it's really exciting to hear about the other initiatives and to see how many things we have in common with that. So PEG is a community indicator system for the city of Winnipeg that ISD established in partnership with United Way in Winnipeg. And we actually started working on this in 2007, and the portal was launched in 2009. So this whole project predates the SDGs, and we're currently in the process of developing the next phase that will be more aligned with the SDGs. But when we developed the portal, we spent a lot of time talking with the public in Winnipeg and with community organizations, with the municipal government and the city government, to make sure that we found out what matters to people in Winnipeg, so that we find out what are the priorities that we should measure and what are the issues that people would like to follow. And based on those consultations, we selected a set of 60 or more than 60 indicators that were sort of separated into the themes that you can see on the right side of the screen here. And when you look at them, you know, they're not they're not so different from the SDGs, and that's what gave us the idea of actually trying to align that in the next phase more with the SDGs. And I think it also shows the power of the SDG framework, because when you go through a bottom-up process like we did, and like the other initiatives did as well, you're bound to come up with something that does somehow map to the SDGs quite well, because they really do cover the entire universe of issues that communities are interested in. So if you could go to the next slide, we basically have 4 components of the work that we're doing, of which the website is one. So on the website, there's sort of 2 different ways of looking at the indicators. One, what you can see on the left side here, is to display indicators as graphs. You can display graphs that compare neighborhoods in Winnipeg, but you can also display it as a time series to see improvement over time. And together with those graphs, we developed a series of videos and sort of blog posts and additional information that try to tell the stories behind the data, and to give a bit of a better impression of what does it actually mean, the data that we're looking at. So here in this example here, it's an indicator on educational attainment, and there are a couple of videos and interviews with educational leaders in the community, with some students and so on, to sort of give some meaning to the data that we're looking at there. And the second way of using the interface is the mapping tool, which you can see on the right side here. So that's basically a map of the neighborhoods in Winnipeg, and most of the indicators where the data is available on that scale, you can display sort of how neighborhoods compare and how neighborhoods perform on that particular indicator, which gives people sort of a good way of saying, so how is it for the people that live in my neighborhood? How is it for myself, and how does it compare to other people around me? So we found that was sort of a very useful tool, and it was very well received in the community. The second pillar of our work is that we do regular media releases and sort of stories on social media on specific issues that come up in the discussions in the community, where we're saying, look, we have some story to tell about the data here, or here's some background on the issues that we're talking right now. The third pillar is an annual report. It's the Winnipeg Wellbeing Report, which summarizes progress on a sort of a specific set of issues. Usually there's a focus on, we have one on education, I think, and we're currently working on the next one. So that's sort of the yearly update on how Winnipeg is doing and how that data can be accessed through the portal. And the fourth pillar is that we've worked regularly with educators, so with teachers from schools and from the university, to encourage them to use the PEG portal in their teaching as sort of an additional source, an educational material to talk about issues that are happening in Winnipeg. Now, as I said, the current portal is still sort of a pre-SDG setup, and we're working right now to basically come up with a PEG 2.0 version of this that will be more focused on a smaller set of indicators, because we found that the set is a bit too large that we have here, but also that will attempt to map the indicators that we'll be selecting with the SDG targets, and also with the indicator system that the UN is proposing to measure progress on the SDGs. So that'll allow people to make the link between sort of what's happening in Winnipeg and how that contributes to the global effort. We're also trying to make the portal a bit more flexible, so that we can actually add or remove indicators if priorities change, or if sort of new issues appear on the screen. And hopefully we'll also be able to find a way to close the loop between data and action, because right now sort of the indicators is running a bit separate from what's actually being done in the community, and it would be great if we could find a way to have sort of a feedback loop where you can say, okay, an organization or a group of actors decided to take action on something that they saw in the indicator portal, and a couple of years back they report back, and we can actually map that to the change in the indicator that we've observed. And the second thing that we're doing in parallel to that is that we're trying to not only replicate or redo the tool in Winnipeg, but we're also replicated in other communities in Canada. So we're hoping to find a setup that we can easily deploy or help other communities to easily build their own indicator system. And I'm very happy to welcome also the first group of communities who are working with the community in Peterborough, Ontario, Bridgewater in Nova Scotia, and Cumberland County in Nova Scotia, and possibly also Kelowna in BC. So we're looking very forward to working with Kasumas there. Yeah, I'll stop here, and we're looking forward to the discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Stefan. Our next speaker will be Seema.
Hello, and good morning from the East Coast of the United States here in Baltimore. And I guess I'm bringing a perspective of a U.S. city attempting to localize the SDGs. We were actually one of the first pilot cities in the United States, with New York City and San Jose, invited to take a look at the newly developed SDGs in 2015 and figure out what it would truly mean to localize the SDGs here in Baltimore. And so we came at it from a slightly potentially different perspective. We are what's called a neighborhood indicators data intermediary for the city of Baltimore. We have been collecting data for Baltimore since 2000 and working with our neighborhoods routinely to try and figure out what kind of indicators they would want us to be tracking for them on a continuous basis to really reflect their quality of life. And most of the indicators that we have attempted to produce for communities is not only driven through community-based desire for that kind of knowledge, but also based on plans that the city has been doing, like the Comprehensive Master Plan from 2007 and the Sustainability Plan from 2009, as well as its current update of the Sustainability Plan for the City of Baltimore, which is currently ongoing. So in 2015, when we were invited to localize the SDGs to Baltimore's context, we very much obviously utilized our existing expertise in not only what's important to Baltimore, but what kind of indicators and data we have already been tracking. And so we took a look at the 169 targets that that are represented in the 17 goals. If you want to go to the next slide, when figure out which one of those 169 targets actually applied to the local US context here in a city like Baltimore. I have, one of the things that we kind of figured out is that some of the 169 targets that are global don't necessarily apply to a US context, but there were other ones that were actually missing. So we took a look at our data, took a look at the 17 goals, and the framework was really interesting because we did clearly find gaps in data that we actually did not have. So the SDGs were very important for us. And we ended up focusing specifically on SDG number 16, which is around peace and justice. In our city in Baltimore in 2015, we had also experienced civil unrest that we hadn't seen in 40 years. And so that SDG number 16 really helped us galvanize a group of people that we continue to meet now around what do we mean by peace and justice in a US context, in a US urban context, and what do we mean, how do we want to attempt to quantify that? In many cases, the data actually does not exist in any kind of acquisitional, any way that we can actually acquire. And so we've been working on trying to figure out how to get better data out of our court system, more routine access to that data, and really working on what do we mean as a city in terms of peace and justice. And so the SDG framework actually highlighted gaps in our own existing data processes. And we were able to kind of go back and forth, not only highlight things that were not in the 169 targets of the SDGs, but then also what we could bring back and bring to Baltimore as well. So it's been a nice kind of work between everything that we're already doing and then also things that we can take from the SDG framework. We are currently working with our Office of Sustainability here in Baltimore and making sure that the current plan update is connected to the SDGs in ways that make it clear that the local context has a way to translate and communicate to a global context. Happy to take questions.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Seema. I guess so. For this next portion of the webinar, I have a series of 4 different questions that I'm going to pose to the panelists. So maybe if all of the panelists, maybe if you could just unmute yourselves right now and just stay unmuted. And I'll go through the questions, and then if each of you could answer, that would be fantastic. So the first question is, why did your organization decide to use the SDGs as a framework for community development? And maybe if we can start with you, Kusum, that would be great.
Sure. So basically, the SDGs provide a framework that address environmental, social, economical, and security challenges faced by nations and communities throughout the world. And as communities start to grow and rapidly urbanize, they need to consider all the goals because they face so many challenges. And the SDGs, they're universal, so they're relevant to developed and developing nation. And it's a standard that can be applicable and understood no matter where you are. And also they're indivisible, so the goals can't stand alone. So if a city is trying to resolve climate change, for example, they can't really do it without considering gender equality, because then they're keeping half the knowledge pool and workforce out or unhappy, and they won't be progressing as quickly. And the goals are also aspirational, so they work towards building a global community. And the goals aren't asking us to give up progress, but they get us to basically look at what we're doing to the planet and to each other and future generations, and try to solve these issues using science, technology, and creativity.
Okay. Celeste, would you like to?
Yeah, no, thank you. I think what's interesting here, excuse me, in Hawaii is I go back to that 1,000-year history that Hawaii and the host culture here has of sustainable resource management based on that inherent understanding that you need to have prosperity, you need to have community, and you need to have stewardship. And it's just very clear in Hawaii. Now, we've certainly had our set of challenges, with development, as everybody does, and we've gone from a place where, as an island economy, the most isolated populated landmass, of being 100% food sufficient resource-wise, to importing 90% of our food and our energy. And so part of what we're experiencing here is a wave of recognizing sometimes you need to go old to go new, and that the knowledge is actually here. And so to us, the SDG framework is really a reflection of what is actually inherent here in Hawaii's culture, especially as an island economy. I think a lot of what we're hearing now is we all globally need to learn how to be islanders again. We've got finite resources. We need to look at the intersection between not just the pillars, but also cross sectors. So the systems that were in place here were highly sophisticated. I'll just give you an interesting example. Somebody we know, a colleague, has just published a book about the 400 names of rain that Native Hawaiians had, which just shows a really high degree of connectivity and precision to nature, but also one that actually helps dictate economic decisions. So all of this to say is that we're really looking at things that are inherent in the culture here, almost predicting what an SDG framework would be, and then recognizing that island communities are really well placed to actually help demonstrate what a successful SDG implementation could look like. So I think that's sort of the inspiration. So in a sense, it just seemed like a very natural alignment. I agree, it is inherently a social justice platform, the SDG framework, that needs to be localized. That's why I'm very inspired by everything that I've heard with the other presenters on the call. And again, I think just because it aligned very well with our existing framework. I should note, I think what sort of formalized this connection was when Hawaii hosted the IUCN World Conservation Congress. Here we hosted 10,000 delegates from across the world, and actually one of the resolutions that came out of that process, an IUCN resolution, was how the Aloha Plus framework is a localized framework for action that should be scaled globally in a locally and culturally appropriate context. So it seemed like a natural alignment for us based on what was currently happening here in Hawaii.
That's really interesting. I think about our example here in Winnipeg, and that we also have, we have a very large First Nations and Indigenous population here, and I think that there's a lot of potential for something similar to happen here, actually. So that's really interesting. Stefan, if you could jump in.
Yes. So our original motivation to start the work in Winnipeg was to basically develop a tool for the community to navigate important issues. The idea was if you can't really measure where you are, then it's really hard to figure out where you want to be going. So the objective was really to support informed decision making, to be able to focus time and effort on the issues that really matter. So when the SDGs came up, we felt that it's a really great tool to bring those issues into a broader perspective. So on the one hand, the SDGs help identify the linkages between issues. So one example is, that often when you have surveys in the community and you ask what is sort of the priority, often things come up like you need more money into road and infrastructure repair and so on. But that these issues are actually, linked to, say, access to grocery stores for food security, or access to education and so on. That's something that the SDG framework really helps bringing into the perspective. And also the SDGs make it easier to sort of link with other communities and link to see your own efforts in a broader framework and as part of a larger collective that tries to achieve the same objectives everywhere. So that the universality of the SDGs basically challenge every community and every country to identify what else needs to be done, because the aspirational character of the SDG says, we're not looking at reducing hunger, we're looking at eliminating it. So, what's the situation in your community, and to actually go a bit broader. But it also makes it easier to acknowledge and recognize progress, because there's some sort of outside validation by comparing with other communities. So overall, it really helps to establish this sense of togetherness in achieving these issues, and allows people to draw inspiration from what other communities are doing, and sort of taking comfort and support in the idea that you're not alone in trying to achieve those goals.
Thank you. And Seema?
So obviously we have came to this process in slightly, I guess, reverse way. And it's, we were invited basically to test out whether a city in the United States could localize these goals. In the Hawaii case, you have really nice statewide leadership and coordination. I wouldn't say that we had that kind of statewide leadership even within Maryland or within the other states where the 3 cities that were pilots. So we were invited to use this process. And what we found was that it has certainly provided, an opportunity for us to show other cities around the world that it is possible that we can actually start to communicate with each other, which is this webinar is actually one great example of that we have a lot in common, and actually cross-fertilizing our ideas at a city level is something that we're probably going to be better off as a city. And so we really did look at this as an opportunity to communicate what's going on in Baltimore to other cities around the world. And it's been a fascinating kind of approach by taking everything that we were doing, connecting it to our existing sustainability planning process, and then being able to leverage those things to a global conversation. And that opportunity has been fantastic for the city of Baltimore.
So the next question is, how did you move your initiative forward, or I guess how are you moving your initiative forward at this time? And Seema, maybe we can just continue with you.
The main way that we're continuing it here in the city is to really connect our sustainability plan, which will be released in April of 2018, to the SDGs in a global framework. And if anybody hasn't seen it already, this is something that New York City did during its localization process. They had already completed a One New York plan. And so they took all of the strategies that the One New York plan had already figured out that they wanted to do, and then linked each one of those strategies to its appropriate counterpart, SDG and SDG target. And we are hoping to do the very same thing here in Baltimore. If you haven't seen the New York report, I highly recommend it. It's really a fantastic, basically, way to translate, your local priorities to the global world, and vice versa, like having these global initiatives be relevant to a local context. I'm not sure the case in Hawaii, obviously, but in a US city, even though we happen to be very close to New York, the UN might as well be the dark side of the moon for a city like Baltimore. We had to really educate folks here what the UN is, what the SDGs even are. We were kind of early out in the gate. And so we're making that translation about these local priorities have global brethren around the world is our next step.
Wonderful. Celeste, maybe you can respond.
No, I absolutely agree. And even more so, I think that there's the issue of really looking at how it's local global. So everything that we do is we're approaching it through a local global lens that, how can globalizing our efforts actually help attract resources to help us implement? And I would note that everyone on the call, one of the challenges I think we all face is that we don't receive a lot of the financial attention that our other partners globally do have access to through the United Nations, as was the case with the Millennium Development Goals. A lot of it is directed towards developing economies, and so I think that's a question I would just have for our group: is how we look to, as developed economies can and should be implementing SDGs as well. What resources are actually there? So I think part of it is and how that affects and the implications locally. I actually think that people are starting to see that we actually, even if we achieved, especially in an island economy, all of our goals, we're still at risk from, climate-related severe weather events, from, water shortages, whatever the case might be, unless the globe collectively works towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So in a sense, we feel compelled to communicate what we are doing at a community level globally, so that there is this widespread change in behavior. So I think similarly, connecting the dots, looking at how that art of translation, looking at what is locally relevant here, how that aligns with the UN framework, I think is really one of the tasks that are currently undertaking. I should note what's very interesting here in Hawaii is that there is proposed legislation that's been introduced to the state legislature, actually calling for Hawaii to formally sign on to the SDGs by statute, similar to the way that they signed on to the Paris Agreement last year, which would be quite interesting to see how that would play out in practice. But there seems to be a lot of community support because people can actually see how their individual initiatives and efforts are reflected in a broader framework.
And Kusum?
So especially because our approach starts off by looking at the city's planning documentation, in order to move our initiative forward, we first had to meet with municipal government staff. And you know what? They're really busy. They have their own issues that they're trying to deal with. So we had to basically show them how what we're trying to accomplish fits in with their planning. And also in Kelowna, we have West Bank First Nations, and they're a self-governing body. So one of the themes for the SDG is leave no one behind. So we're also trying to make connections with them, and they have their own planning documentation as well. And so we're trying to incorporate that. And a big thing is also, so in order to get data, you have Statistics Canada and BC Stats, but they don't always give us a full picture. But organizations who work locally here in the SDGs can give us a complete better idea of the progress that's made. So it's important for us to talk with the government and with Statistics Canada, but also with local NGOs and academia.
Thank you. And Stefan?
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, our main next step is to really transform the platform that we already have into a tool that effectively localizes the SDGs in Winnipeg and in the communities that we're working with. And as we're working on that, maybe important to note is that we as we were working with our partner, the United Way, we had an advisory committee that would sort of ensure this continuous feedback from the community, that we always sort of close the loop between what we're doing and how the community perceives that. We're trying to build on that, and sort of us starting discussions now on how to rebuild the platform that we have. And what we're seeing there is that we will really try to focus it more, to really select those indicators that are important for the narrative and for the story that needs to be told in Winnipeg and in the other communities, because that's the ones that will actually engage the community to take action. Another thing that we're looking for is to build a platform that is flexible in the sense that it can actually accommodate additional data sources. I mean, a lot of the data that we're using is sort of StatsCan data and so on, but there are a lot of other initiatives like the Canadian Index of Wellbeing, or communities have done their own surveys, so that we can integrate data that's there that might have a bit of a different perspective than the standard data that's being used for the SDGs, but still is relevant and maybe helps to really get the community perspective communicated through the portal. And the third one is really this idea to make a better link between the data that is there and the activities that actually influence change in the community. So to really close that feedback loop and say, like, so what should we make visible on the portal that stimulates action, and then how does that action actually affect well-being in the community? So in a nutshell, we're trying to reimagine the platform to make sure that it communicates with the public and really increases that engagement, and sort of capitalizes on the traction that the SDGs are gaining. I mean, we've seen that there's now a lot of organizations, a lot of businesses, and governments that all start becoming very interested in the SDGs and using the SDGs as a framework. And by providing that platform, we're hoping that we can bring everybody together and use a similar lens to come together and discuss what is the best action to go forward.
Wonderful. And maybe, Celeste, we can start with you for the next question, which is what impacts do you see in your communities? Like what results have you seen or impacts have you seen so far?
No, I think that's a great, I just go back and comment that with our Dashboard 2.0, we're really looking at engaging the community more deeply in actually their ability to reflect the things that they're currently working on. So I would say it's not even so much how is the framework helping to drive action. We do see that through just coordination. It's certainly helping to provide a coordination component across our private sector, grassroots partners, and policy makers, government officials. So I think the coordination component is actually really the success in all of this, but really what we're doing is reflecting work that's already underway. I think that's actually very important to acknowledge that it's not just as a result of identifying a framework, but it's really a result of uplifting that. And we are seeing efforts to just coordinate more broadly on actual projects, water, energy, food nexus projects where you can have multiple benefits. Another thing that we're doing is actually engaging our local private sector partners here very specifically on ways that they can green their businesses, linking that to our Aloha Plus framework that's ultimately linked to the SDG framework. And where they can actually see that alignment with the Global Compact, for example, I think really helps provide assurances that, hey, the private sector can and should be leading on this and not being brought along after the fact. So I think one of the fascinating things that we're seeing is different communities that might not be thinking about how their businesses, for example, align with the SDGs, can in fact see a lot of the triple bottom line outcomes in the SDG framework and the localized framework. So I think a lot of it is how it's reflecting work that's currently underway, I think leveraging, to Stefan's point, if we look at how we can leverage technology and innovation through the dashboard to get a broader set of future generation leaders that ultimately will be responsible for implementing the 2030 goals on board too, that's really another one of our clear objectives. And to that end, we are actually seeing a lot of progress with just the students and youth in the different schools statewide that actually totally get the SDGs. And there's been a lot of really exciting activities and groups that have convened. One example is a youth congress that convened in Hawaii last year, international, where the students got together and wrote a letter to the United Nations on how they wanted to implement the SDGs in their community. So I think that's how we see moving it forward, both with diverse partners, but also I think students are huge advocates that understand this inherently.
And Seema? Okay, Stefan, maybe you can.
Sorry about that.
Sorry, nope, that's okay. Okay. That's okay.
So we are, I have a very quick answer in this case. Like I mentioned, we are working with our Office of Sustainability, and we're trying to work on pushing out the SDG connection to our local sustainability processes in April, and we're allowing that team to really drive kind of the messaging around how we use these data in kind of the efforts. So.
And Stefan?
Sorry. Yeah, I think the main impact that we're seeing is sort of a similar example. The city of Winnipeg is currently revising its Our Winnipeg plan. So that's the plan that lays out the future objectives for the city, and they've invited us to participate in the process to advise on how to use the indicator system to formulate targets and come up with a monitoring framework. And we've seen a couple of other initiatives also where groups came together, sort of inspired by the data that they saw on the portal to tackle a problem. So probably the most prominent example was the End Homelessness in Winnipeg Coalition. That was really just a group of organizations that sat down together and said, like, so what can we do? And it stimulated both sort of concrete action to reduce homelessness, but also a new kind of survey that this coalition started implementing, the street survey, which we also helped them to feed back into the portal. So that's the sort of the main things that we've observed, and there were a couple of other initiatives like that.
That's perfect. And maybe just kind of in the interest of time, because it is about 10 to 11, just the last question is around, what kind of advice would you give communities who are interested in adopting an SDG framework in whatever form it be? If at this point, I guess, if anyone who would like to start, you can choose.
So I can mention something. This is Kusum speaking. So some of the lessons learned for us is basically, in order to measure progress, we want to see improvement in numbers. And data can sometimes be difficult to obtain at a municipal level. And also, numbers don't always give us the entire story. So it's important to connect with a multitude of different organizations that work in various areas to get the entire story and to put the numbers into perspective. And connecting with various organizations also help you find different perspectives and provide information on hurdles that you don't have to go through because they already have. And it just helps you find different sources of data.
This is Seema in Baltimore. What I would recommend is not avoiding the SDGs as something potentially seeming irrelevant. I think a lot of US cities are just now coming on board to recognize that even at a city level, these SDGs really do provide a way to communicate to the outside world. And I think that is incredible, because all of our cities have issues, whether we're in the United States or whether we're in, you know, Africa or Asia, and that we actually have a lot in common. And so not necessarily altering everything that you're doing, but taking what you're doing and creating even a mental map or a physical map towards the SDGs, and you'll see that there's a lot of things in common that the framework allows you to try and translate to. So that's the approach that we took here in Baltimore, was take our local, map it to the global, and then actually finding the gaps to bring back locally, and that becomes a good feedback process.
Yeah, this is Celeste. I'll just build on what Seema said. Absolutely. I think the opportunity to see how the SDG framework can actually uplift local priorities and create a broader network of action, because I think that helping to communicate to the communities that collectively, with everybody working towards achieving the SDGs, is actually going to help our efforts here locally. So absolutely, this needs to be connected to local efforts that are already underway that can be uplifted and connected through this platform. I'd also say another key issue is really looking at public-private partnerships in the loose term of the word. Sustainability is a long-term value proposition, inherently out of sync with short-term political cycles. We have to be looking at how, as we get new leadership across our counties, our state, different private sector partners and leaders, how there's a certain level of coherence that is seamless that continues throughout that process. So I think really engaging the entire community through a public-private partnership effort, I think, is a critical piece that can really help what is happening at the county levels with our cities, elevating their climate action plans and other types of county planning, and statewide as well. So I would say, engaging the community is key, and then engaging a diversity of partners will help with implementation.
Yeah, maybe just to add to that, I think there's sort of three pieces that came out of our experience. One is really echoing this importance of consultation and engagement, that really needs to be an integral part of the project and not just a phase or so. And the aim must really be to engage all major community actors in the project, so to literally leave nobody behind or leave nobody outside of the project, just to make sure that the community takes ownership of that. The second one is that we think it's important to look at the project or at an indicator system as a service to the community. Laszlo Pinter, who was one of the sort of the master brains of the project, he coined this term and saying, like, indicator systems should be a part of the community infrastructure that need to be provided, that need to be there, and sort of be there as a service for the community to use. And maybe the third point is to really make an effort to maintain a reputation as a neutral broker of information. So looking at data basically means, we're reporting on what's happening, but we're not necessarily, determining what should be the next steps or recommending what should be the priorities. We're just providing the tool to enable the discussion around that, so that the community can have an informed decision-making process on what should be the next steps to be taken.
Okay, thank you very much. We have some fantastic questions, both in the Q&A and in the chat, in the webinar chat box. We are running a little bit short on time, but I think that maybe I'll read out 2 or 3 questions, just because there are some really good ones. A lot of them, many of the questions are around mobilization and taking, the numbers and putting that into action. So I guess maybe that would be the first question. How do you transition, from just being a portal and displaying data and information to mobilizing that information into action on the ground?
So this is the Seema from Baltimore. We were not limited by the 169 targets, let's put it that way. Or I know that sounds like a lot, but for example, just to give a quick example, we are a city that has lost 30% of our population. We're an eastern seaboard city in the United States that's lost. We were 950,000 people, and now we're 620. So we have a pretty severe problem with vacant and abandoned structures because we have way too many buildings based on who currently lives here. And so vacant and abandoned properties is a data set that we have been focused on in our own work locally for many years, that we chose to use as a local indicator to track the SDG around sustainable communities, SDG number 11. So it wasn't a part of the 169. It was a clear kind of key indicator for us here in our city. And so we are adopting it as part of our SDG work. So I wouldn't feel limited. It was not necessarily, no one's going to say you can't do it, and you have to make sure that it works for your city.
Would anyone else?
Yeah, so I would say this is Celeste with Hawaii Green Growth. Action is really what we're all about. We're managing the dashboard, collecting data from our partners is really with a view to driving action, showing transparency and accountability. But our organization is also involved in some strategic partnerships. One of them is, for example, a $300 million flood mitigation project, which started as a narrow objective of flood mitigation, but when we applied sort of a integrated framework, our Aloha Plus framework, we're looking at it connects across multiple goals and sectors. So we're looking at water ecosystem services, water restoration, invasive species management. And for example, we're seeing this great relationship developing where, hotel operators downstream that are managing flood, for example, can see the importance of investing in water restoration and invasive species management in the upper watershed. So that's just one example where we're actually applying. People can see the benefit of taking a cross-sectoral approach. Also, I mentioned earlier, engaging our private sector and our youth in different strategic partnerships. So I think we're really about translating this policy into action. It's something that we're very focused on. And I think once we start demonstrating success in some of these projects and initiatives where you can actually show how you can capture savings, there's efficiencies to be captured across the various sectors and silos when we're doing any type of project, it will only increase the support for sustainable development goals.
Thanks, that's great. Maybe I'll move on to another question. So the next question is, so how can you sell this cooperative action and development to the private sector? At this point, really, community and civil society has been the instigator of most of this work and has really led the way. And in this person's perspective, so the private sector has fallen behind a bit. So I guess, are there any concrete ways to demonstrate that win-win nature of the cooperative opportunities that private firms can use in order to get on board and use this sort of a model?
So this is Susan. I can answer that question. So I just want to say that BCCIC, basically what they've done is they've mapped out all the a lot of the CSOs in the province of BC. So in Kelowna alone, they've mapped out about 300 plus CSOs, and they've basically narrowed it down and specified which SDGs they're working towards. And Kelowna itself is a city that's rapidly growing right now, and Kelowna is working on visionary documents to see where they're going to be in the future, where they're going to be in 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. And they know that they have to work together with CSOs, private organizations, and the municipal government together to resolve this, this growth. So the city of Kelowna for the last year and a half has been communicating with the community itself and asking where they want to see it go and looking at the growth itself. And I think they understand that it's not just about working in one industry, it's about collaborations in the private, the public, and the CSO world.
Yeah, maybe one aspect to add to that is I guess there's also a need to be sort of open to or aware that there's probably many different ways in which different types of organizations, private businesses can contribute. In Winnipeg, we're right now having a discussion with some of the bigger companies that are located or have their offices in Winnipeg that have just signed on to an initiative that's called Impact 2030, where the private sector wants to stimulate action among their employees. So really bring back some benefits to the communities via engaging their employees, and not necessarily sort of through the way that you would typically expect the private sector to contribute in their in their production activities or so. And that's something that we see right now as having really, really big potential, and it's a new way of engaging the private sector and the people within those firms.
That's fantastic. If anyone has any, does anyone have any final comments that they would like to share? Okay, if not, I think that we're just a little bit over time, so I will. I'll stop the questions there. I'd like to say thank you to everyone who's participated today, to all of the speakers, the presenters. You've been fantastic and inspiring, and I really hope that everyone who has been listening today has gotten a lot out of these presentations. We will be making the recording of this available. It will be on the IISD website. You can go to iisd.org and find it there. However, if you have difficulty finding it, you can also contact me directly, and my email address is on the site. So yes, feel free to, if you have any additional questions or you'd like to get in contact with any of the presenters today, also feel free to email me, reach out, and I'd be happy to connect you to any of the speakers. So thank you very, very much to everyone again for a great and inspiring conversation, and we'll let you know if and when we have any more conversations like this in the future.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.